Do you ever feel like you're watching your own life through a window? Like there's an invisible pane of glass between you and every moment, transparent but impenetrable. You see everything clearly, perhaps more clearly than anyone else, but you can never quite touch it. Your mind is a cathedral of questions echoing endlessly. Why did they say it that way? What does this pattern mean? What truth is hiding beneath the surface? You tell yourself to just experience things, to be present. But your mind refuses. It calculates the depth before you can feel the water. It maps the territory before you take the first step. While others dive into experiences like it's nothing, you stand at the edge, analyzing. You think, and then you think about thinking, and then you analyze why you're analyzing. Even in stillness, there's noise inside, a golden network of connections firing constantly, never resting. You watch people live with an ease you can't fathom, and you wonder, what would it feel like to simply exist without dissecting every breath, every word, every heartbeat? You are the observer, the interpreter, the one who sees what others miss. But somewhere along the way, observation became your only way of being. You became brilliant at understanding life, and forgot how to live it. It didn't start as a burden. It started as survival. She was 7 years old the first time she learned that the world was safer when she could predict it. The house had moods, invisible atmospheres that shifted without warning. One moment, laughter echoed through the hallways. The next, silence pressed against the walls like a held breath, and she learned to read that silence the way sailors read storms gathering on the horizon. She noticed everything. The slight tightening at the corner of her mother's mouth that meant disappointment was coming. The particular heaviness in her father's footsteps that signaled he'd had a difficult day, which meant she should be smaller, quieter, less. The trembling pitch in voices that promised an argument was building beneath ordinary words. While other children played without thought, she developed an early warning system, a complex radar that scanned every room she entered, every conversation she overheard, cataloging data, calculating probabilities, constructing maps of emotional terrain. Her mind became a fortress. Inside its walls, she could retreat when the outside world felt too chaotic, too unpredictable, too overwhelming. She discovered that if she thought hard enough, if she analyzed deeply enough, she could create the illusion of control. She couldn't stop the storm, but she could see it coming. She couldn't change outcomes, but she could prepare for them. Thinking became her superpower, her shield, her sanctuary. And then something unexpected happened. People noticed. Teachers praised her insight, her maturity, her unusual ability to see connections others missed. "You're so perceptive," they said. "You're wise beyond your years." Friends came to her with their problems because she always knew what to say, always saw the patterns they couldn't see. She became the one who understands, the one who knows, and with each validation, each moment of recognition, the pattern deepened. Her identity began to crystallize around this gift. By the time she reached adolescence, she couldn't remember a version of herself that didn't overthink. The coping mechanism had become her operating system. She didn't just think deeply occasionally, she thought deeply always, about everything, because that's who she was now. The girl who read between the lines. The one who questioned beneath the surface. The observer who stood slightly apart, watching, interpreting, analyzing the performance of life while others simply lived it. She told herself it made her special. Different. Better, even. While others stumbled through life reacting emotionally, she navigated with precision and foresight. She had clarity they lacked. She had depth they couldn't fathom. What she didn't realize yet was that she was also building a prison. One intricate thought at a time, she was constructing walls between herself and immediate experience. The sanctuary was becoming a cage. The superpower was becoming a curse. But she wouldn't understand that for years. For now, she only knew that thinking kept her safe. And so she kept thinking. And thinking. And thinking. By the time she reached adulthood, She had become exactly what everyone expected her to be. The wise one. The person you called at 2 in the morning when your world was falling apart. The friend who could untangle any problem, decode any situation, see the truth hiding beneath layers of confusion. Her phone buzzed constantly with people seeking her insight, her clarity, her exceptional ability to make sense of chaos. She had built an empire on understanding. And empires, once built, must be maintained. The irony was suffocating. She could diagnose everyone else's patterns with surgical precision, but her own inner landscape remained a labyrinth she couldn't map. She knew exactly why her friend kept choosing unavailable partners, could explain the psychological mechanisms behind her colleague's self-sabotage, understood the root causes of her sister's anxiety. But her own exhaustion? Her own loneliness? Those she couldn't decode, or perhaps didn't want to, because decoding them would mean admitting they existed in the first place. And the wise one doesn't struggle. The wise one knows. So she performed her role flawlessly. When someone asked how she was doing, she offered a measured response, never too vulnerable, never too needy, always tinged with just enough insight to redirect attention back to them. When confusion gripped her, she hid it behind elaborate explanations. When she felt lost, she constructed intricate theories about why feeling lost was actually a sophisticated philosophical position. She had become a master architect of deflection, building towering structures of analysis to obscure the simple, terrifying truth. She had no idea what she was doing. The cage she'd built was beautiful, ornate, impressive from the outside. But inside, she could barely move. She couldn't ask for help because asking for help meant revealing that she didn't have all the answers, and not having all the answers meant the entire identity she'd constructed would crumble. She couldn't admit ignorance because ignorance was incompatible with being the person who sees what others miss. She couldn't simply say, "I don't know," without immediately following it with, "But here's what I think might be happening," because silence felt like failure. Even her emotions weren't safe from analysis. When sadness arose, she immediately began dissecting it. Why am I sad? What triggered this? What childhood wound is being activated? What neural pathways are firing? By the time she finished analyzing the sadness itself had transformed into something else, a concept, an abstraction, a theory about sadness rather than the actual experience of feeling sad. She had intellectualized herself into numbness. Every conversation became a performance. Every interaction required her to maintain the facade of profound understanding while inside, a voice whispered the truth she couldn't speak aloud. "I'm just as confused as everyone else." Maybe more so. Because at least they are confused about life. I'm confused about being confused. The distance between who she appeared to be and who she actually was had become an ocean. And she was drowning in waters so deep, she couldn't even admit they were there. She stumbled upon the research on a Tuesday afternoon, exhausted from a full night's sleep. 8 hours of rest, yet she'd woken feeling like she'd run a marathon in her dreams. She typed into the search bar, "Why am I tired even after sleeping?" The answer arrived in the form of 3 words that would change everything: default mode network. The brain, she learned, has a background processing system, a network of regions that activate when we're not focused on the external world. For most people, this network toggles on and off. It runs when you're daydreaming, then quiets when you need to concentrate, then returns during moments of rest. It's supposed to be a rhythm, an ebb and flow. But in some minds, the tide never goes out. The golden neural pathways she'd always imagined lighting up her consciousness weren't just metaphor. They were literal. Synapses firing constantly, connections forming and reforming, the machinery of thought running at full capacity even when she was trying to rest. Her default mode network didn't know how to power down. Even in sleep, her mind was working, processing, analyzing, constructing narratives about the day that had passed and the day that would come. No wonder she was exhausted. She'd been running a mental marathon for decades without realizing there was supposed to be a finish line. Then she discovered cognitive fusion. The term felt like a key turning in a lock. It described exactly what she'd been experiencing her entire life but had never had language for, the phenomenon where thoughts stop being thoughts and become reality itself. Most people experience thoughts as mental events, transient, optional, observable. I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. But for her, thoughts weren't events. They were facts. I am not good enough. The distinction seemed small, but it was everything. She'd spent years believing that her thoughts about reality were reality. That her analysis of a situation was the situation. That her interpretation of someone's words was what they actually meant. She'd been living inside a simulation of life constructed entirely by her own mind, mistaking the map for the territory, the menu for the meal. The research on rumination hit even harder. Studies showed that excessive analytical thinking, the kind she'd been praised for, the kind that made her deep, actually impaired decision-making. The more options she considered, the less satisfied she became with her choices. The more she analyzed her emotions, the further she drifted from actually feeling them. Her superpower was, neurologically speaking, a malfunction. It was both devastating and strangely relieving. Devastating because she'd built her entire identity around something that science suggested was actively making her life worse. Relieving because it meant this wasn't a personal failure. It wasn't weakness or inadequacy or moral failing. It was a recognizable pattern, a documented phenomenon, a particular configuration of neural wiring that happened to millions of people. She wasn't broken. She was just wired differently. And wiring, she discovered, could be rewired. But first, she had to admit that the wiring needed changing. And that admission would cost her everything she thought she was. The job offer arrived on a Monday. It was everything she'd said she wanted: better pay, meaningful work, a chance to grow. She opened the email with excitement that lasted approximately 47 seconds before her mind began its familiar dissection. What if the company culture wasn't right? But what if it was perfect and she was just afraid of change? Was the salary enough given the cost of living increase? But wasn't she being greedy, focusing on money? What about growth potential? But what if growth meant sacrificing work-life balance? What if she regretted leaving her current position? What if she regretted staying? 3 weeks later, the offer expired. She'd made spreadsheets, consulted friends, researched every angle. She'd analyzed herself into complete paralysis. The opportunity slipped through her fingers while she was still calculating whether her fingers should close around it. This was the pattern. This had always been the pattern. Every decision became an archaeological dig, every choice a philosophical treatise. She couldn't order food at a restaurant without considering nutritional content, ethical sourcing, whether she was choosing based on genuine desire or social conditioning. By the time she decided, the waiter had circled back twice and her friends had finished their meals. But the real cost wasn't missed opportunities or cold dinners. The real cost was feeling itself. Her friend called, voice breaking, needing someone to just listen. And she did listen, but simultaneously, she was analyzing. This sounds like attachment trauma. Classic fear of abandonment. Probably rooted in her relationship with her father. She was so busy diagnosing her friend's pain that she missed the moment when her friend needed her to simply say, "That sounds really hard." When they hung up, her friend thanked her for the insight. Neither of them acknowledged that insight wasn't what had been asked for. She'd done it again. Intellectualized someone else's emotions into oblivion because feeling alongside them was too raw, too vulnerable, too uncontrolled. And then there was joy. Or rather, the concept of joy, because the actual experience of it remained perpetually out of reach. She'd be at a concert, music filling the air, people swaying around her, and instead of surrendering to the moment, she'd be thinking, "Am I enjoying this? Should I be enjoying this more? Why does that person seem to be having a better time? Is this really joy, or am I just conditioned to think concerts should be joyful?" By the time she finished analyzing whether she was happy, the song had ended. The moment had passed. She'd documented it, photographed it, thought about it, everything except actually live it. The golden neural network that once connected her to deeper understanding had become a labyrinth of tangled wires, each thought leading to another thought leading to another until she couldn't find her way back to the simple starting point. The present moment, the actual experience, the unmediated feeling. Her gift had curdled. Her insight had become a cage. The clarity she'd spent a lifetime cultivating now obscured the very thing she was trying to see, life itself, happening right in front of her, while she stood behind the glass, analyzing, interpreting, understanding everything and experiencing nothing. She was brilliant at explaining life. She'd forgotten how to live it. The shift didn't announce itself with thunder. It began with breathing. She'd tried meditation before, of course. But she'd approached it the way she approached everything, as a problem to solve, a skill to master, a concept to understand. She'd read books about meditation, analyzed different techniques, compared mindfulness to transcendental to Zen traditions. She'd thought about meditating far more than she'd actually meditated. This time was different. This time, she simply sat a day. And when thoughts arose, and they did, constantly, like waves that had forgotten they were supposed to break, she didn't analyze them. She didn't ask why she was thinking about her childhood or what her anxiety meant or whether she was doing meditation correctly. She just noticed. Oh, there's a thought. There's another one. And beneath the thoughts, something else, the rise and fall of her chest. The temperature of air entering her nostrils. The weight of her body against the chair. She was feeling something without thinking about feeling it. And it was terrifying. And it was liberating. She started noticing the difference between necessary analysis and compulsive rumination. Necessary analysis solved problems, made decisions, helped her navigate complexity. It had a beginning, a middle, an end. Compulsive rumination was a hamster wheel, endless circular thinking that generated heat but no light, motion but no movement. She began to recognize the texture of each, the way you'd recognize the difference between hunger and anxiety, both felt in the stomach but fundamentally distinct. Slowly, she developed practices that brought her back to direct experience. When anxiety gripped her chest, instead of immediately asking "Why am I anxious? What does this mean? How do I fix this?" she placed her hand over her heart and simply felt it. The tightness. The rapid beating. The physical sensation without the story. Sometimes the sensation dissolved. Sometimes it didn't. But either way, she was with it rather than analyzing it from a distance. The real test came on a Thursday evening. Her mother called, voice thick with grief over a loss that couldn't be fixed. And she felt the old machinery whirring to life. The impulse to explain, to interpret, to offer insight that would transform pain into meaning. Her mouth opened to begin the familiar performance. And then she stopped. "I'm so sorry," she said instead. "That sounds really hard." Silence on the line. Not the uncomfortable silence of inadequacy, but the full silence of being truly met. Her mother began to cry, and she didn't try to stop the tears with wisdom. She just listened. She just stayed. She was present without performing, connected without analyzing. For the first time in decades, she chose being over understanding. The glass wall dissolved. Not permanently, it would return, it always did, but now she knew it wasn't structural. It was optional. She still had the same mind, the same capacity for depth, the same golden neural pathways lighting up with insight. But she'd learned the difference between using her mind and being used by it. Between thinking as a tool and thinking as a prison. Between the brilliant servant and the terrible master. She could still think deeply when it served her. But now, finally, she could also simply be. And in that being, she discovered what all her analysis had been searching for: peace in the present moment, connection in the space between thoughts, wisdom in the sacred art of not knowing. The storm quieted. Not because she'd solved it, but because she'd finally stopped trying to. If this resonated with you, you're probably not here by accident. Subscribe. This channel is for people choosing clarity over chaos.